The Library of Clouds. Elorin woke with the soft fragrance of last night's garden still woven through his hair, a mild sweetness of damp soil and star-touched petals that made his first breath feel like a sip of cool water. And he stayed very still so that the hum of Wistmere Tower could settle into the gentle rhythm he had learned to trust. The rhythm that sounded like a friendly hand smoothing a coverlet, and as he listened he felt the memory of silver paw prints gather like small moons at the edge of his blanket, as if the cat had left a few calm sparks to keep him company until morning. And he smiled into the pillow before sitting up with the care of one who does not wish to disturb a room that has been kind. He touched the threshold stone with 2 fingers, a habit that pleased the house, and crossed the stair with bare feet while the old wood offered tiny notes that were not creaks so much as acknowledgments. And he stepped into the kitchen where Master Aldrin was already awake, warming water in the kettle and turning a thin knife along the seam of a book's leather so gently that the blade seemed to float. And the old wizard glanced toward Elorin with the quiet affection of someone who has watched dawn arrive many times and still delights in its first color. They shared tea at the threshold where the sun warms the stone, the kind of tea that tastes faintly of thyme and fields. And Aldrin asked how the garden had slept, and Elorin replied that the flowers had folded themselves with a sound like breathing and that the bowls of water had kept the stars for a long while before releasing them at the edge of morning. And Aldrin nodded as if a lesson had been confirmed and, saying nothing more, set a small linseed cloth by the door for later work. After the cups were rinsed and turned upside down to dry, Elorin went to the northern bed to greet the resting blooms. And though they were closed he could see the promise of night arranged inside each green pocket the way a soft thought waits at the back of the tongue. And he scraped a handful of leaf mold between his fingers and whispered to the worms that their patience was a kind of gold. And he felt the bed answer with a loosening of fragrance that resembled the memory of rain. He carried that calm scent up to the study, opened the window in the manner he had learned from the sky the night before, palm near the latch, breath even, a pause for the 2 airs to agree, and he lifted the frame without fuss so that the room exhaled relief. And there he stood in the clear quiet that follows a well-made movement, feeling that even the dust had grown lighter. It happened while he was putting away the quill and smoothing the last curl from a stray ribbon of paper, a change at the far wall that arrived without show, like dew on a stone, a thin ladder appearing where there had been none, slender rungs the color of dried reeds rising through the ceiling in a line so gentle that the eye believed it had always been there. And Elorin knew at once, as one knows when a page has been turned, that this was an invitation, not from the tower alone but from a higher room that needed no walls. He set his hand upon the first rung and felt nothing like cold or heat, only a friendly surety, like the balance of a bird on a finger. And he thanked the house under his breath, and he thanked the night flowers that had taught him to trust what arrives in darkness. And he thanked the silver-pawed cat for showing that pathways can be walked where there is no ground. And then, with the patience of someone who does not want a blessing to hurry, he began to climb. The air above the ceiling felt like linen dried in a meadow. It held a faint sweetness as if light had been soaking there and then wrung out. And when his head lifted through the round space between beams, he found himself in a chamber that was not a chamber. A blue expanse shaped by kindness rather than stone. And across that expanse stretched long shelves made of cloud, their edges soft yet certain, glowing as if they remembered lightning but preferred the company of quiet, and upon those shelves rested books bound with mist and breeze, each volume a mild body shaped by air and light and the softest pull of the sun. And Elorin stood as a respectful guest in a library made by the sky. He waited, because waiting has become one of his good skills, and a draft that felt like a sigh curled around his sleeve and nudged him toward an aisle where a book the color of morning milk beaded with tiny drops. And when he set both palms upon its cover, the droplets ran to his fingerprints as if delighted to be given form. And the title steadied from shimmer to sense. A line of wind letters that read patterns for teaching windows to breathe. And he laughed softly, for he had often wanted to open the study window without startling the room, and here was the very lesson. The pages did not exist until he learned the trick of them, which he learned as one learns to balance when turning in sleep, by doing less, by breathing over the surface with even attention until the mist wrote itself into words that stayed while he exhaled and faded while he drew air. And the phrases were tender and precise. You may place your hand near the latch so the glass will recognize a friend. You may wait until the air inside and the air outside have agreed. Then you may lift. You may remember to thank the hinge because hinges enjoy praise. And Elorin read this with the kind of happiness that stays in the bones. He replaced the book and the drops on its cover brightened once like little stars surprised to be seen and then returned to their mild shine. And another aisle beckoned with a scent that suggested both pine and far-off salt. And he found a thin volume that showed itself as recipes for rain in 3 tempos. And when he held his breath long enough to hear his own pulse, the page formed lines like slow waves, first a rain for rest, then a rain for work, then a rain for washing away the day. And though he knew he could not carry the pages down, he felt the shapes of those rains settle into the place where he keeps steady songs. He wandered as a content child wanders a friendly path, moving where the attention of the room warmed, and he passed spines whose titles drifted into clarity just for him. The politeness of hinges, bees and their cartography, how stones remember footsteps, a guide to folding patience into bread. And he reached for a small book tucked between 2 that loomed over it like cliffs over a valley. And as he touched it, it brightened and released the faint fragrance of warm wool, and the title formed as the courtesy of sweeping, and inside he was shown invitations instead of rules. Begin at the threshold to greet the outside world with one respectful stroke. Gather crumbs toward the center as one gathers friends around a table. Leave a round space in the middle where breath can rest. And he thought of Aldrin's silent habits and smiled at how old wisdom hides in ordinary gestures. The library learned him while he learned it. for the shelves shifted gently to meet his eyes and the path widened when his feet leaned that way, and soft light gathered at the places where he paused to understand. He found a reading hollow shaped not like a chair but like a cradle of coolness. And there he held a book that smelled of rosemary and ash and read stories about doors from the wind's point of view. The wind that loves to practice scales along reed beds and prefers rooms that forgive it for arriving uninvited. And while he read, he felt again the presence of the silver-pawed cat, not in sight but as a reassurance along the margin of the air, the sense that prints had been laid long ago, where his attention now walked. He closed his eyes and the library wrote a small story on the inside of his lids, a story of swallows mapping the air above the river, their bodies finding the threads that suit them, and the threads weaving a net that caught nothing but showed everything. And when he opened his eyes, he carried that net as a way to notice without holding. He moved to another shelf where the spines offered titles like Bowls Waiting to be Filled, The Calm of Bowls, The Proper Weight of a Blanket, How to Turn a Page with Breath Only. And he chose that last one and practiced until the missed page responded with a sound like silk and clean straw. And he laughed softly again, and the laughter seemed to belong to the room. He grew hungry, and the shelves answered with a book the color of brown bread. And though he found no recipe in the ordinary sense, he found 3 ways to make yeast feel welcome: a palm warming a cup before water touches it, a spoon allowed to rest between turns, a whispered wish that the loaf will find a good crumb. And he recognized the tender humor that had always lived in Aldrin's careful hands. Through a round window of pure sky he saw the garden bed below, the folded flowers wearing their quiet promise, and he breathed across the crystal with the method taught by the first book, and a willow-colored fog drifted down and rested upon the leaves. And the leaves made a sign of comfort, a small tremble like happiness. Down an aisle came a librarian made of moving air, a figure that looked like a fold become aware, and it nodded with a care that felt like patience, and it offered him a ribbon of pale cloud to serve as a bookmark between moments. And when he accepted, the ribbon warmed and cooled in his fingers like a breath he could keep. And he asked how a book of mist could be trusted to keep its words. And the answer arrived as a feeling that trust grows with use, that a lesson dissolves on the shelf. To rise inside the student is practice, that the book is a door and the walking happens elsewhere. And he bowed without lowering his gaze and felt understood. He found a collection titled Stories the River Taught the Clouds and read paragraphs that smelled of reed and round stones and honeyed sun. And one tale described a boy who counted fish shadows not to catch them but to thank them for moving through his day. And he recognized a kinship and let the page fade with a sigh like a satisfied elder. A suite of thin spines called minute maps drew tiny currents around chair legs and up stair rails and through keyholes in winter. And he learned where dust likes to sleep and how to wake it without scolding. And he thought of the broom back in the study with fondness. Time floated without edges here, and when his knees asked for a cushion, one arrived like the calm of moss. And when his shoulders cooled, a strip of sunlight unrolled itself like a scarf and rested there. He cupped his hands and gathered a small heap of fog, then told into it the story of his starlight garden, of bowls reflecting constellations into leaves, of flowers that preferred the company of night, of the cat who traced circles above the bed, and the fog scribbled lines upon itself and decided to be a book with a brown-green sheen, growth that happened while no one was looking, and he placed it on a lower shelf with a smile because he knew some traveler of this sky would find it. Without searching, up a stair made only of brightness, he reached a meadow of vapor where tall spines stood like slim trees, and he touched one with a cover the blue of distance and felt the letters for names the wind gives to kindness flow into him. The wind names kindness as a hand that knows where to rest, as a voice that chooses a soft angle, as a broom set with bristles lifted, as a cup rinsed and turned before sleep. And he looked through the round window at Wistmere Tower and let those names fall like petals, and the house answered by warming its stones. He wished to remain but felt the library's own courtesy, a reminder that learning prefers to walk, and so he looked for a last reading to carry him gently out. And near the ladder a modest book tasted like clear water when he breathed upon it and called itself Lessons for Reading Fleeting Things. And the pages formed only when he listened to his breath. And they told him that some sentences are written on steam and must be read with skin, that a cool draught at the wrist is a paragraph about the wishes of a room, that the weight of a blanket explains the body's welcome, that a hinge tuned with one thoughtful drop of oil will compose a line of gratitude. And he closed the book with the sense that it had closed him in return, folded around him so he would not lose the sense of ease. The ladder had arranged itself without being asked, and he bowed to the shelves and to the librarian of air and stepped down as slowly as foam falls back to the sea, carrying not words to recite but rhythms to live. The study welcomed him like water greeting a palm, and the window stood ready, and he opened it once again with the new courtesy, and the curtain moved the way a river moves when a stone is placed with kindness, and the room offered a sigh that sounded like an answer to a long question. He went to the kitchen and set water to warm, then walked to the garden to lift the veil from the bed so the leaves could sip the day, and the folded blossoms held their secrets like small held songs, and the cat crossed the path on invisible rails, paws bright and mild, and it paused and blinked in approval, then traced a narrow silver circle above the soil where the new seeds slept. And Elorin understood that the stars would have something additional to say tonight. With tea poured, he joined Aldrin at the threshold and spoke of shelves made of cloud and books bound by breeze. And the old wizard listened as if hearing an old friend, then suggested that the boy read The Afternoon Breeze by the chimney, for it had been uncertain, and Elorin nodded, grateful for a chance to let the sky's lesson become a house habit. He swept the hall as the little book had instructed, beginning at the threshold, gathering the day toward the heart of the room, leaving a round space where breath could linger. And he kneaded bread with a warmed bowl and a resting spoon and a wish for a good crumb. And later the crust gave tiny crackles that sounded like applause from polite hands. He took his notebook yet did not trap the sky's words, preferring to draw a small map of the library as a greeting rather than a capture. A few soft lines for aisles, a little circle for the window, a bowl at the center for collected light, and beneath it a single inked sentence. Knowledge can be kindly and brief, and he found that enough. By the chimney he studied the breeze as one studies a shy creature, opening the flue a finger's width, pausing, opening again, listening, until the air chose a clear path and the room's silence changed from held to welcoming. Evening arrived with its patient silver and the starlight garden woke. Petals unfolding with the same ease as breathing, bowls of water drawing the constellations into shallow mirrors. The cat walking the air above with light rings that drifted down like blessings. And from beyond the wall the river answered with a sound like a book closing softly, a sign that a chapter wished to rest. Elorin thanked the stars aloud for the ladder and the shelves and the librarian of air. He thanked the tower for moving aside to let a dream pass. And he thanked the silver-pawed cat for showing that trust is a kind of ground. And he washed his hands with cool water and a pinch of crushed mint and carried the freshness to his alcove where he lay with the window open. The curtain breathed with the night. The hum of Wistmere blended with the world's own hush, and above the roof the library of clouds waited like water in a bowl, patient and bright without haste. And as his eyes grew heavy he practiced the last lesson, reading the fleeting, the brush of cool across his cheek that said a cloud had turned, the warmth in the stone beneath the mattress that said the house was pleased, the tiny sound of the cup on its shelf that said the wood enjoyed its task, the even pace of his heart that said the day had come home, and he drifted downward that felt like climbing upward, and he climbed in a way that felt like breathing, and he breathed in a way that felt like reading a page the sky had placed near his pillow. And he promised to bring the learning back down again tomorrow, not as speech but as steady hands and kinder doorways and a garden that blooms when stars lean close. And inside that promise he slept as if the sky had cupped him in both palms.